Shabbat Shalom and welcome to Congregation Bet Tikva. Now, I didn't have a chance to record a teaching last week because unfortunately I've been doing a lot of traveling. Um, but before I set off, I had an opportunity to preach last week in a local church. And I wanted to share with you the same things that I shared with the church that I was preaching at. So, the particular church I was preaching at, they had spent 17 weeks going through the book of Revelation. And as I sat with the pastor, I wanted to kind of get a feel of what was going on in the church. And as we began discussing it, the Lord really began to confirm a word that He'd been developing in my spirit. And now that it's been sort of formally put together, I felt like it was something worth sharing with you as well. So for those of you that haven't been paying any attention, we're currently sitting in the latter part of one of the most heated and controversial election years in our nation's history. Facebook, social media, they're all drowning in political memes, and people are expressing their views very candidly. The news has become so relentlessly depressing that it's difficult to even watch. Bumper stickers are everywhere, and it would seem that more people have started advertising who they're not voting for than who they are. And on top of the growing political upheaval that we're facing in the country, the conservative or Christian population has suffered a number of tremendous blows to its psyche over the past few years. Abortion is now on the verge of becoming legal up to the day of birth. Radical Islam is rapidly gaining a stronghold in our country, which makes many uncomfortable. Terrorist attacks in public places are becoming more and more common. Intolerance is the word of the day, unless it applies to biblical values. And if that wasn't enough, we're still dealing with racial riots, police brutality, and persistent rumors of another impending financial collapse. And the list just keeps going on and on and on. Now, the reason for this is really very simple. The Judeo-Christian foundation of our nation is collapsing, and America, as you have previously known it, will soon be no more. Now, some of you might be uncomfortable with what I'm saying right now. To be honest, I'm uncomfortable with what I'm saying right now. But the fact of the matter is, many of you feel like the world is surely coming to an end. It seems that half the people I know have liquidated their life savings last fall, or purchased enormous stashes of foods, survivalist goods, or perhaps bought up an arsenal of guns and ammunition. Others are off chasing every prophetic end-time conference and revival that they can get to, and the rest are too busy watching cat videos on Facebook to even notice. I titled the message today, as I was speaking, the one that I gave in the church, Christianity in a Post-Christian World. But essentially, the purpose of this message is the life of a believer in a world that no longer, or a society that no longer um, promotes or appreciates the Judeo-Christian values. The reason I created this message is because I believe that more than ever, as our society moves further and further from its Judeo-Christian roots, the church as a whole The body of believers on a global level has begun to lose its bearings on what it now thinks being a Christian or a believer is supposed to look like. But in order to really get a grip on it all, there are a few concepts that I want you to understand. And these few concepts are absolutely critical to our Christian journey in these times, particularly if you live in the Western civilization. The first concept is that we need to get over ourselves. No, seriously, we need to get over ourselves. You see, Western civilization, and Americans in particular, are amongst the most egocentric people on the planet. We steadfastly believe that the world revolves around us, and every apocalyptic scenario imaginable seems to occur either in New York City or Los Angeles. And many Bible-believing Christians today in this country find it very difficult to accept that America is nowhere to be found on the biblical map. And I'm sorry if I'm hurting your feelings, but we're just not there. Interestingly enough, though, Canada doesn't seem to have a problem with this. And Mexico couldn't care less. But America? Somehow this stark absence of our presence in the end time scenario deeply offends us. The second concept that we need to understand is that we need a new watch. Our perception of time is seriously distorted. We forget that our nation is less than 300 years old. Whereas in contrast, many of the areas still visible in the old city of Jerusalem, for example, are over 2,500 years old. Now, I recently took my two children to the National Arts Museum in DC, and they were hosting an exhibit from ancient Greece. But on the way, you had to pass by all of these paintings by famous American artists. And the oldest ones were from like, I don't know, the 16, maybe 1700s, right? But then you get to the Greek exhibit. And there are all these amazing bronze castings of real-life people, artistically designed artifacts, and the like. And the youngest one was from like 120 years before the birth of Messiah. Now, many of you are even now struggling to wrap your brain around those kinds of numbers. It's beyond most of us to fully comprehend the vastness of that many years. The inconceivable number of lives that have breathed their first and their last before us, moment by moment, expressing hope and joy, sorrow and sadness, stress and fear. They lived through times of safety and national disaster, economic collapse and prosperity. They watched nations rise and fall. My point is that the once great and powerful Greek Empire is now ancient history, and little more than dust remains of it. Just like many world empires before it, and several that have come after it, and every single one of their citizens was just as egocentric as we are today, because human nature has not changed since the beginning of time. There's this amazing passage in Isaiah chapter 40. It says, "Have you not known? Have you not heard? Has it not been told to you from the beginning? Have you not understood from the foundations of the earth? It is He who sits above the circle of the earth, and its inhabitants are like grasshoppers, who stretches out the heavens like a curtain and spreads them out like a tent to dwell in. He brings princes to nothing. He makes the judges of the earth useless. Scarcely shall they be planted, scarcely shall they be sown, scarcely shall their stock take root in the earth, when He will blow on them, and they will wither, and the whirlwind will take them away like stubble." Now, the third concept I want to present today is that history always repeats itself. You see, America is not alone. This social, spiritual phenomenon is not isolated to the U.S. or even to the Western civilization. The fact is, we are seeing the culmination of a pagan and heathen world returning ever so steadily to its roots. But this didn't happen overnight. It's been a slow, arduous process occurring over decades, centuries, millennia. You see, the church or the body of believers desperately needs to understand that this is not the first time that this has happened in history. First, it happened with the nation of Israel, repeatedly abandoning the ways of God, falling into apostasy and idolatry, only to be punished or destroyed, and then redeemed and restored over and over again. Ironically, though, it was during one of these very same cycles in history that a man came preaching and teaching that the kingdom of heaven was near. He walked the streets of a nation filled with hopeless people. A religious institution was in place, but so rotted out and corrupt it was of no real value. He ministered to a nation bound under a heathen government that promoted and endorsed every kind of immorality that pervades our own societies today. This is the world into which Jesus, Yeshua, arrived, preaching and teaching and healing and offering a hope beyond this world. Then 40 years later, the world as they knew it would come to a cataclysmic end as the Romans destroyed Jerusalem and tore down the temple brick by brick. The lucky ones fled for their lives to the farthest reaches of the empire in hope of safety, while the others that remained behind were slaughtered or sold into slavery. What I need you to understand is that the vast majority of the New Testament is written to these very people. People who suddenly found themselves trapped in a post-Judeo-Christian world, where the teachings of Yeshua, Jesus, went against the mainstream religious institutions, where the writings of Paul or James or Timothy or John and the others are admonishing believers across the empire, do not fall prey to the ways of their pagan communities, but rather remain steadfast in God. Learn how to be in the world without conforming to the world. Obey your masters with gentleness and humility. Abstain from judging the world around you, but instead reserve that judgment for those that profess to live under the banner of Yeshua, of Christ. Love one another. Be at peace. Yeshua, Jesus, has conquered the world. Why do I say all this? Because in the 3,500 years that have passed since the first 5 books of Moses were written, Genesis through Deuteronomy, you need to understand that nothing has really changed. The same moral crises that we face today were being addressed in the Bible way back then. Nothing is really new. So, what does it look like to be a believer in a post-Christian world? I heard a story about an ancient rabbi who once concluded, after reading the 5 books of Moses, that it was the duty of every man to imitate God by observing these 4 facts of loving kindness: clothe the naked, visit the sick, comfort mourners, and bury the dead. Then, after studying the rest of the Hebrew Scriptures, he later added that anyone seeking to truly persevere in righteousness should imitate God by feeding the hungry, assisting the poor, having mercy on the sinful, rescuing the perishing, healing the brokenhearted, restoring homes and families, and doing good to all. One of his students spoke up and asked the rabbi, "Scriptures also teach us that God is a God of absolute integrity, truth, holiness, love, and justice. He is righteous in his every decision. How can we possibly imitate that?" The rabbi answered his student, "We can't. Only the Messiah can do that. But if you can succeed in doing all of the rest, you'll have solved all the problems in the world." You see, our God is an unfathomably large God. His ways are not our natural ways. His thoughts are not our thoughts. And his timetable is not our timetable. We don't know the day or the hour the world will end, or when Yeshua will come to take us away. Now, it's been said that every generation since the ascension of Messiah expects to be the very one to see his return. But the fact of the matter is, the world was waiting for the Messiah to come and save them the very first time for a whole lot longer than we have been waiting for his return. What we do know is that until then, the simple instructions he left for us have never changed. Both Moses and Yeshua taught the same thing. Love God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind. Love your neighbor as yourself. Trust him. Walk in his ways. And don't worry about everything else. He has it under control. Well, my friends, that's my teaching for the week. I hope that it's encouraged you, maybe given you something to think about. But above all, I hope and I pray that you seek his peace as you continue to walk your journey of faith in him. I hope that you have a fantastic Shabbat full of peace and joy and rest, and a wonderful week to come. Shabbat Shalom.